The wind came down from the hills in long, patient breaths, sliding through the grass and worrying the cottonwoods along the creek until their leaves whispered like old men trading secrets. Dusk stretched itself thin over the ranch, turning the sky the color of bruised peaches and cooling blood. Eli Mercer reined his horse to a slower walk, boots loose in the stirrups, eyes moving the way they always did at this hour: barn, fence line, water, tree shadows. Evening was when trouble liked to show itself, when honest shapes blurred and the land pretended to be something else. That was when he saw her. She stood near the fence by the creek bend, half hidden by the tall grass, her back to him. For a moment he thought she might be a trick of the light, a stump shaped wrong, or a shadow where one didn't belong. But then the wind caught the hem of her coat and lifted it, snapping the torn fabric against her legs like a flag of surrender. She steadied herself with one hand on the fence post, shoulders drawn tight, as if holding herself together by will alone. Eli eased his horse to a stop. Folks didn't wander this far out unless they were lost, desperate, or running from something. Sometimes all three. He tipped his hat without thinking, an old habit his father had drilled into him before he'd ever been big enough to ride alone. "I don't mean to startle you," he called, keeping his voice low, steady. Loud voices spooked people, and animals, just as fast. "You're a long way from town." She didn't turn right away. He watched the way she stood, the careful way she shifted her weight, like every movement had to be measured first. Pain did that to a person. When she finally faced him, the last of the sun caught her profile, sharp and pale against the darkening trees. Her coat was finer than anything Eli had seen out here in a long while, dark wool, city-made, with buttons that had once shone. Now it was ripped open along the side seam, the tear running from just under her arm down toward her hip, snagged with burrs and thorns. Dust streaked her skirt. Her hair had come loose from whatever careful arrangement it once had, strands sticking to her face where sweat had dried. "My horse threw a shoe," she said. Her voice was even, but it carried a tightness beneath it, like a wire pulled too hard. "I tried to walk it in. That didn't go well." She glanced down at the tear in her coat, fingers brushing the ripped edge. When she looked back up at him, her eyes were steady. Not frightened, not pleading, just decided. "It's torn," she said. Then, after a breath that seemed to cost her something, "Take it off for me." The words hung between them, plain and practical, spoken the way one might ask for water or a rope. Still, they landed heavy. Eli felt his horse shift under him, sensing the change in his posture. He swung down, boots crunching on gravel, and tied the reins to the fence. Up close, he could smell her, dust, sweat, sage crushed underfoot, and something sharper beneath it that made his jaw tighten. He stopped an arm's length away, hands hanging useless at his sides for a second longer than they should have. His father's voice rose up in him, as clear as if the old man were standing there. "Mind your manners. Don't touch unless you're asked. And even then, be careful. If you're hurt," Eli said, slow and careful, "I can." "It's just caught," she interrupted. Her jaw tightened. "And it's making it worse." He nodded once, accepting that. He reached for the torn seam, then hesitated, eyes flicking up to hers. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Permission. The fabric was rough beneath his fingers, the wool stiff with dirt and strain. He worked gently, easing it back, careful not to pull too hard. As the coat shifted, it caught again, and she sucked in a sharp breath despite herself. Eli froze. "Easy," he murmured, more to himself than to her. The coat finally loosened with a faint tearing sound, smaller than the first rip but loud enough in the quiet evening. As he eased it off her shoulders, the wind slipped in to take its place, brushing against the blouse beneath. The smell hit him then, iron, unmistakable, mixed with sage and dust. Blood. Eli's hand stilled, his eyes dropped, and he saw the dark stain spreading beneath the pale fabric at her ribs. Not pouring, not soaking through completely, but enough to tell him this wasn't just a coat caught on a fence or a bad walk after a lost shoe. "Sit," he said, his voice firmer now. He gestured to the fence rail. "Before you fall." She opened her mouth as if to argue, then thought better of it. She lowered herself onto the rail, one hand braced, breath shallow. Up close, he could see the fine tremor running through her fingers, the way her skin had gone pale beneath the dust. Eli moved without thinking after that. He carried the torn coat to the fence, draped it over a post, and headed for the barn at a near jog. Inside, the familiar smells of hay and leather grounded him. He grabbed a lantern, a bucket, and a stack of clean rags he kept for just such things: horses cut on wire, hands split on tools, the small violences ranch life dealt out without apology. When he came back, she was still sitting straight-backed, staring out toward the creek as if committing every shadow to memory. The light from the lantern softened her face, carved deeper lines around her eyes. She looked younger than he'd first thought. Too young to be out here alone. He set the bucket down, dipped a rag in water, and knelt in front of her. "I'm going to take a look," he said. "If that's all right." She nodded once. He lifted the edge of her blouse carefully. The cut was there, just beneath the ribs, a narrow line that had bled more than it should have but not as much as it could have. Clean. Too clean. Not the ragged tear of a fall onto rocks or a fence. Eli's mouth tightened. "That hurt?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Yes," she said simply. He cleaned it as best he could, his hands steady, his mind racing ahead and circling back all at once. He'd seen knife wounds before. He'd stitched one in his own leg years ago, alone in a storm. This looked like that, looked like intention. "You didn't get this from a shoe," he said quietly, eyes lifting to hers. For a heartbeat, the wind seemed to pause. The cottonwoods held their breath. Then she smiled, just a little, a curve of the mouth that didn't reach her eyes. "No," she said, "I didn't." He wrapped the cloth around her ribs, snug but careful, tying it off with practiced ease. When he was done, he sat back on his heels and looked at her properly. Her gaze didn't waver. There was something in it he couldn't quite place. Not fear, not relief. Calculation, maybe, or resolve. "You should rest," he said at last. "I can get you water. Food." "That would be kind," she said. Her voice softened then, just a touch. "Thank you." He stood and offered his hand to help her up. She took it, her grip surprisingly strong, and let him guide her toward the house. As they walked, Eli felt the weight of the quiet pressing in, the sense that something had shifted the moment he'd stepped off his horse. The ranch, the land, the evening, all of it felt suddenly alert, like an animal that had caught a new scent. Behind them, the torn coat flapped once more on the fence, a dark shape against the fading light, marking the place where a stranger had asked him for help, and where, without knowing it yet, he had already given more than he could afford. Night didn't fall so much as it crept, easing itself into every low place and hollow until the ranch felt smaller, held tight by dark on all sides. Eli lit the lantern and set it on the rough table near the door, the flame settling into a steady glow that pushed back the shadows but didn't banish them. Outside, the cottonwoods sighed again as the wind shifted, and the creek answered with a low, steady murmur. The sounds were familiar, comforting, and yet they felt different now, as if they were listening too. He guided her to the bench by the wall and helped her sit. She moved stiffly, carefully, like someone measuring pain against necessity and choosing necessity every time. When he stepped back, he noticed the way her eyes followed his hands, his movements, cataloging them. Not fear, awareness. "You should keep pressure on that," he said, nodding toward the bandage. "If it starts bleeding through, tell me." "I will," she replied. He filled a tin cup from the bucket and handed it to her. She drank slowly, not spilling a drop, then held the cup in both hands as if grounding herself. The lantern light caught the faint tremor in her fingers again, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Name?" Eli asked, partly because silence felt too loud. She hesitated just long enough for him to notice. "Anna," she said. The word came out smooth, practiced. "And you, Eli?" "Well, Eli," she said, testing it, "I'm grateful you came along when you did." "So am I," he answered, though he wasn't entirely sure why. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The quiet stretched. Eli leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes drifting toward the window that looked out over the creek. That was when he heard it, a sound just barely out of place. Leather, protesting under weight. A creak that didn't belong to trees or fences or wind. His body reacted before his mind did. His shoulders tensed, his gaze sharpened. Years of living alone on land that didn't forgive mistakes had trained him to notice the wrongness in familiar sounds. Anna noticed too. She lifted her head, eyes flicking toward the window, then to him. Their gazes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Her mouth tightened. "Eli," she said quietly. He raised a finger, asking for silence, and stepped closer to the window. He didn't look straight out, not at first. He angled himself, catching the reflection in the glass, watching the movement beyond without making it obvious. The lantern light behind him threw his shadow long across the floor, but outside, along the creek line, the dark was thick enough to hide almost anything. Almost. There was a glint, brief and sharp, like a star falling to earth. Metal catching moonlight. Eli's breath slowed. He counted shapes the way his father had taught him. Don't rush, don't guess. One low shape near the reeds. Another farther back, half hidden by the cottonwoods. Then a third, moving where the ground rose toward the fence line. 3, at least, maybe more. He felt the moment stretch, the world narrowing down to heartbeat and breath and choice. He turned his head slightly toward Anna. "Stay here," he murmured. "Don't move." Her lips parted, then closed again. She nodded once. Eli reached for the rifle propped beside the door. He lifted it slow, careful not to scrape the wood. Every sound felt amplified, even his own breathing. He eased the door open just enough to slip outside, letting the cool night air wash over him. The moon had climbed higher, bright enough now to silver the tops of the grass and trace the line of the creek. That was when he saw them clearly. 3 men crouched low, using the land the way predators did. One was closest to the water, boots sunk into mud. Another lingered near the trees. The third was edging toward the barn, thinking himself unseen. Eli stepped fully onto the porch, rifle raised. "Don't," he called out. The word cracked through the night like a whip. One of the men froze. Another cursed softly. The third bolted. The shot came almost at the same time as the movement. Eli didn't remember deciding to fire. He only remembered the kick of the rifle and the sharp crack that split the dark. The man by the creek went down hard, a shape collapsing into reeds and mud. Birds exploded from the trees, wings beating panic into the air. The second man ran, boots slapping earth, vanishing into the cottonwoods. The third hesitated just long enough to turn and raise his own weapon. Behind Eli, the door burst open. Anna moved faster than her wound should have allowed. She grabbed the lantern from the table and hurled it toward the creek with a strength that surprised him. The glass shattered, oil spilling and catching flame in an instant. Fire blossomed, low and hungry, racing through the dry reeds. Smoke curled upward, thick and acrid, stealing the men's cover. The man who had hesitated cursed again and turned to flee. Eli fired a second time. The shot went wide, close enough to make the message clear. The man disappeared into the dark, the sound of his running swallowed by trees and fire. Silence rushed back in, broken only by the crackle of burning reeds and the distant splash of the creek fighting flame. Eli lowered the rifle slowly, ears ringing, heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. Anna stood beside him now, revolver raised, her posture steady despite the pain etched into her face. She scanned the dark with practiced ease, eyes cold, calculating. After a long moment, she lowered the gun. "I think that's all of them," she said. Eli looked at her then, really looked. At the way she held herself, at the weapon that fit her hand like it belonged there, at the calm that settled over her once the danger passed. "You're not who you said," he said quietly. She exhaled, a long breath she might have been holding since she stepped onto his land. "I told you my name," she replied. "I didn't tell you my business." The fire along the creek burned itself down quickly, leaving smoke and the smell of scorched grass behind. Eli walked the perimeter with the rifle still in his hands, checking shadows, listening for movement. He found the man he'd shot lying still, breath gone, eyes staring at nothing. He felt no triumph, only a familiar, heavy resignation. The range didn't leave room for softness when choices were made. When he returned, Anna had sunk onto the bench again, the fight draining out of her all at once. Her face had gone pale beneath the dust. Eli knelt and checked the bandage. It held, but her breathing was shallow. "You shouldn't have moved like that," he said, more concern than reprimand in his voice. She gave a weak smile. Didn't seem like a good time to sit still. He helped her lie back, folding a blanket beneath her shoulders. The lantern was gone, but moonlight through the window filled the room enough to see by. Outside, the night resumed its watchful quiet, as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. Who were they? Eli asked after a while. Anna stared up at the ceiling, eyes tracing the beams. Men who didn't like me leaving, she said. Men who didn't like what I know. And what's that? She turned her head to look at him. Enough to make them follow me this far. Eli leaned back against the wall, the weight of the day settling into his bones. He thought of his ranch, of mornings that began with the sun and ended with honest exhaustion. He thought of how thin the line was between that life and the one that had just brushed up against it, sharp and dangerous. You can stay, he said finally. At least till morning. You're not riding anywhere tonight. Relief flickered across her face before she could hide it. Thank you. He nodded once, then moved to bar the door and check the windows. When he returned, she was already drifting toward sleep, exhaustion pulling her under. He sat in the chair nearby, rifle across his knees, eyes on the dark beyond the glass. The ranch settled around them, creaking and breathing, the land indifferent but present. Eli understood then that the shock that had frozen him earlier wasn't fear alone. It was the realization that the torn seam hadn't been just a coat, or even a wound. It was the boundary between the life he'd built and the trouble that had found him anyway, and now lay sleeping under his roof.